happen. And that is why we come to our next question, where we come, does the dominant intention theory survive? Before going to that, I'll just touch upon the rule 58 1A, which has been recently introduced, because that has also come, because that rule 58 1A had been read down in the LNT case by the larger bench. A new notification was issued on 29 January 2014. That notification itself was a subject matter in the SLP in the Supreme Court in the case of Builders Association, and the judgment thereof has been delivered on 21st January. The Supreme Court in that case has disposed of the SLP in terms of the LNT decision. The Supreme Court has told that whatever has been told by LNT larger bench will apply to the MCHI case. And so rule 58 1, basically in MCHI, the rule 58 1A, the basis of rule 58 1A was challenged that the cost of land, whether the procedure laid down in rule 58 1A and rule 58 1 is properly laid down or not. That was the challenge. And in the meantime, in the LNT case, the Supreme Court had read down rule 58 1A. The rule 58 1A notification has come, and in the SLP of Builders Association, the same was dealt with. Two more points which the Supreme Court has observed therein are, if petitioners have any grievance about notification, they may pursue the remedy in that regard. Because as we see, the notification, although it has come, and although the notification gives the various percentage-wise slab for properties under construction at the various stages, it is still not in consonance with the para 115 of the LNT judgment, when it says that the taxation on the works contract transaction should be after the it will not be on the immovable property, but only after the contract, only after the buyer enters into an agreement with the builder. After that, only the tax liability will arise. Before that, it will not arise. The percentages given therein are, to that extent, not matching with what has been provided in the Supreme Court judgment of LNT. Because here, even if, say, we take an example, that the buyer has booked a flat on the 10th floor of a building under construction. The building is computed up to the 5th floor. It is between the stage of, it is in the stage of RC construction. At that point of time, as per the Supreme Court observation, tax can be levied only on the part up to the level to which, after the level on which the immovable property is constructed. Basically, if it should not be levied on the immovable property part of it. On the immovable property, only on the movable part, which are used in the execution of works contract, on that only it should be levied. Now, if we try to exactly read that portion of the Supreme Court judgment vis-a-vis the rule 58 1A, the rule 58 1A has provided guidelines, and those guidelines they are giving that up to claim level 100%, then below that 95%, after the completion of getting the occupancy certificate, intention of the parties, goods, delivery, etc. would continue to be defined according to the known legal connotations. But the 46th Amendment does not give a license, for example, to assume that a transaction is a sale and then to look around for what is goods. It is not so that you first determine the sale and then find out the goods. If the goods is immovable property, it cannot be taxed. Second respect, the dominant nature test to be applied to a composite transaction not covered by 366(29)(a). See, for 366(29)(a, there by the deeming fiction, those transactions have been made liable to pay tax as a works contract, because there is a deemed sales of transfer of, there is a deemed sale by way of transfer of property and goods involved in the execution of works contract. These transactions are mutual sales, and transactions which are mutual sales are limited to the clauses of Article 366. These are the deemed sales. All other transactions would have to qualify as sales within the meaning of Sale of Goods Act 1930 for the purpose of levy of sales tax. So still those transactions would have to qualify for sale of goods. The examples given in the judgment are of a doctor who gives medicine, whether there is a works contract by giving those medicines. The lawyers, we as professionals, whether the paper given by us as an opinion to our clients or as a balance sheet, whether they would be liable, and the PS and the Supreme Court in that case has very categorically given these two examples and stated that these are not transactions which are covered by Article 366(29)(a), Clause B. Means still those transactions are outside the purview of Works Contract Act, and the dominant intention in those is not a transfer of property. It is either giving medicines or it was giving of some documents or papers. And again, this relates back to the reason is given in that judgment. The reason why these services do not involve a sales are ultimately attributable to the principles enunciated in Gann and Dunkley. It refers to the first Gann and Dunkley of 9 STC. Namely, if there is an instrument of contract which may be composite in form, in any case other than the exceptions in Article 366(29)(a, unless the transaction represents two distinct and separate contracts and is discernible as such, then the state would not have the power to separate the agreement to sell from the agreement to render service and impose tax on the same. So for a doctor who is giving medicines, that transaction, although it's a composite transaction, it cannot be split. So that analogy still remains. The test therefore for the composite transactions other than those mentioned in this article continues to be, did the parties have in mind or intend separate rights arising out of the sale of goods? If there was no such intention, there is no sale even if the contract could be disintegrated. So the test is, what is the substance of the contract? And that is the dominant intention theory. And that is also explained in that judgment. Now, whether the LND judgment, this is a question put for all the groups, that whether the LND judgment overrules this judgment of BSNL, LND judgment's larger bench Act, we have section 45, which categorically gives the principal-agent relationship, who will be liable, and how the taxes will be paid by the principal and the agent, and what is the measure of tax for each of them. But at that point of time, when this contracts were, when this judgment was delivered, the AP-VAT rules did not have such provisions. Hence, the assessing officer had tried to add the entire contract of the subcontractor in the turnover of L&T, at which L&T had opposed that the property is directly passed from the subcontractor to the employer, and L&T is not directly involved, and as per the terms of the agreement and as per the Andhra Pradesh VAT rules and Act rules, Andhra Pradesh Act and rules therein, there was no such provision for the main contractor to add such turnover into his gross turnover of sales. So the facts there were entirely different. If we go through the judgment, if we come to know further that the Andhra Pradesh VAT rules were subsequently amended when the case was between the High Court and the Supreme Court. In between that, the AP VAT rules had been amended, the Rule 17(1)(c) was amended, and thereby they had made a clear-cut bifurcation afterwards that the contracts on which the subcontractor has paid the tax, the main contractor will not be liable for paying tax. And that observations have been given in the Supreme Court judgment. The Supreme Court judgment again has taken recourse to the builder. So now the question comes up that when we are talking of this single sales and single team sale or multiple team sales, a theory is being put up that there is a direct sale from the subcontractor to the employer in such case. It is not that the subcontractor is selling to the main contractor to the employer. Based on the L&T 1 judgment, it is being said that the property is directly getting transferred from the subcontractor to the main contractor. Now whether and how this analogy will apply in the state of Maharashtra. While dealing with this judgment, the Supreme Court had taken recourse to the Builders Association case of 73 STC, where it was stated, ordinarily, unless there is a contract to the contrary, in the case of works contract, the property in the goods used in the construction of a building passes to the owner of the land on which the building is constructed, when the goods or materials are used or are incorporated in the building. There the recourse has been taken if the property directly passes from the person doing the work to the employer. Coming to the MVAT rules, what do the MVAT rules say? Section 45(4) covers the liabilities of contractors and subcontractors. The relationship between the contractor and subcontractor shall be deemed to be that of principal and agent. Now there are various subclauses from A to F in section 45(4). The subclause A says, in one of the in that para in subclause A, there is one line. If such works contract had been executed by himself alone, that is the principal, the liability to pay tax on such total turnover of sales shall be that of the principal. Subclause B says, where the agent executes such works contract, the liability will be joint and several. Then, in the subsequent clauses, it gives us all the modalities of how it will be done. Who will pay the tax when the principal has executed the work or the subcontractor has executed the work. These modalities are given. In subclauses C and D, it speaks of the tax paid. In subclause C, it says tax paid by the agent. In subclause D, it says tax paid by the principal. Then subclause E, it says no deduction from payment of tax unless the above forms are produced. Subclause F and G pertain to the declarations to be given by the dealers. The subclause F says that if the subcontractor issues the form 408 to the main contractor, then the turnover of sales will be deducted from the turnover of sales of the main contractor. The turnover of sales on the tax is paid by the dealer. The terminology and the words used therein are loosely held. is following each of the subsequent methods. So the first situation is main contractor and subcontractor both are under the composition method. So if the main contractor is under composition, he will be covered by section 42(3). As per the section 42(3), the aggregate value on which tax is paid by the subcontractor will be allowed as a deduction to the main contractor. In this case, 9 lakh rupees has been paid. On 9 lakh rupees, tax has been paid by the subcontractor. Now, because here we have told that he is a subcontractor is under composition scheme.
15 minutes.
Yes, sir. So it will be a very difficult task to complete even the slides. I'll try my best. The situation 2 is regarding the main contractor following the legal method and subcontractor under the composition. Now, if the main contractor is under the legal method, that is Rule 58(1), as per Gann and Dunkley, those deductions are allowed.
But yeah, those are the queries for the group discussion. Let them come and have a carry. I will get it. For आप अभी skip करिए. सीधा group discussion. Quarter one सीधा. इतने दो skip करो ना.
I just finish up this situation 2, then I'll continue. This 58(1), if the contractor is under the legal method, then he'll be able to reduce the price paid by way of subcontract of 9 lakh rupees and the profit relative as per the clause D and clause H. He'll be able to reduce the profit margin, and there the entire amount will be allowed as a deduction. In other situations, in general, if we talk of, if we see the note appended to the table, there it says the table under Rule 58. The situation there is that the subcontract price, the quantum of price on which tax is paid by the subcontractor will be allowed as a deduction in those cases. And those are the issues which have been raised in this situations. The next issue is whether employer issues TDS certificate in the name of the main contractor. The main contractor has subcontracted the entire value. Whether can the subcontractor be eligible to claim the TDS credit for the TDS certificate issued by the employer in the name of the main contractor? The provisions of section 31(4) says that the person making the said can be claimed by third line over here, may be claimed as a payment of tax by the person making the said supply, and credit for the payment may be claimed by the said person. So whether does this clause help the subcontractor to claim the TDS credit? Do the forms and the rules and the form 704 or the modalities of the AMBET Act, do they provide for such credit? Or whether such credit would be subject to a litigation? And if yes, what should be the processes which the main contractor and subcontractor should follow to claim this TDS credit? Yeah, again, the next issue is between the contractor and subcontractor. Where the contract is awarded to the main contractor for 100 plus VAT plus service tax, subcontracted for rupees 60 lakhs. In this case, both the main contractor and subcontractor are opting for the 5% composition. Now the main contractor, he will be issuing invoice to the employer. The invoice will be issued for, in this case, for 100 plus 5 rupees of tax. So 105 rupees is the gross value of the invoice. When the main contractor wants to fill up his form, two issues arise in this. What is the GTO of the main contractor? Whether to consider as 105. I have given various options in the booklet, the various 5 options which are available. Whether the GTO should be 105, less tax collected by the contractor is 5 rupees, less value of subcontract which should be either 60, or taking into consideration tax tax of 3 and issue the forms to the main contractor. So whether 60 should be reduced or 63 should be reduced. That is the question. Now, if you are trying to reduce that, the balance taxable turnover and the tax collection, in the first two cases, on page 90 of the booklet, I have given those examples. In the first two cases, there appears to be an excess collection. If you see the written form, where the tax collection comes as 5 rupees, but the tax liability of the contractor is only 2 rupees because he is going to pay only on 40 rupees and not on the balance 60 rupees because there the subcontractor is already paid. So that issue arises. If the contractor says, no, I show my turnover as 102, less 2 rupees what I have to pay, I show as collection, then it's again a wrong presentation of the financial data. According to me, the form 230 through form 233 is not considering this situation, or neither the form 704 is considering this situation, and hence the anomaly remains in such cases. Joshi sir has given 2-3 more questions in this. Whether form 704 can be issued by the subcontractor opting for composition. Yeah, whether form 407 can be issued by the subcontractor opting for composition. Whether the subcontractor can collect tax from the main contractor. If yes, whether main contractor should claim set off or should claim deduction from GTO of sales. So these 3 questions have been further given by the sir, and I request the group leaders to please note that. The next issue is on TDS.
10 minutes.
Yes, sir. Next issue is on TDS. TDS on divisible contracts. Now, the situation is there is a single work order of 100 lakh rupees. That single work order is split into supply of materials for 60 lakhs and application of labor job for 40 lakhs. एक single order है, दो में split किया है. Whether contractor is liable to collect TDS on such contracts, whether on 100 lakhs is to be taxable direct, that is the question. And suppose if the work order is, would it make any difference if for the same contract, separate orders are issued for supply of material and application of labor job? So basically, it is the intent of the parties that whether they want to give a work order or they want to give separate orders for supply of materials, application of labor. Other option is whether can it be said that although there is a single work order which is split into two, the material component over there is only for the quantitative purposes and the determination of prices between the parties per se. If there is no intention to have supply of material separately and application of labor job separately. For example, say the order is for construction of a wall. There is a single work order. Say the wall is of 100 rupees. Out of 100 rupees, 60 rupees is towards cement and steel and 40 rupees is towards the labor for making the wall. The order is one. It's a single order, but yes, on cement and steel they are paying VAT separately on the entire sale value as a sale, and on the labor component, service tax is paid separately. Whether in such context can it be said that TDS is deductible or it is not deductible? The next issue is regarding figures under 1% composition. Again on TDS. Now, if you see the LNT judgment, the LNT judgment says that the transaction will be taxable when the buyer is entering into an agreement to purchase the flat. Say again the same example. The buyer wants to purchase a flat on the 10th floor. 5 floors are completed. Till that time, the 5 floors which are completed are the immovable property. That immovable property is of the contractor. The contractor, the bidder. The bidder has given a contract to say a subcontractor. Now, if we see section 31, between the contractor and subcontractor, no TDS is to be deducted. The question arises that if it is an immovable property, till the time I am selling it to the flat buyer, then I am not a contractor. I am taking it for myself, and I have given a contract to the person. I have not given a subcontract. So on that point of time, TDS liability would arrive. There is no relationship of contractor and subcontractor till that point of time. Second issue over here. I am going to construct 100 flats. I may sell 25 flats as an immovable property after getting the occupancy